Picture this, endless plains stretching to the horizon, a sea of grass beneath a sky so vast it feels like another world. Now imagine the thunder of hooves, thousands upon thousands, shaking the earth as a whirlwind of mounted warriors charges forward, their battle cries echoing across the steppe. This is the army of Genghis Khan, the man who would forge the largest contiguous empire the world has ever seen. But here's the question that defies belief. How did a boy born into obscurity with no wealth, no royal blood, and no army rise to command such unstoppable power? How did a child named Temujin, left to die in the wilderness by his own tribe, become the legendary conqueror whose name still echoes through history? The answer lies in 20 extraordinary secrets, shifting tides of fate, ruthless strategies, and unbreakable willpower that transformed an outcast into an emperor. This isn't just a story of battles and bloodshed. It's a tale of survival against impossible odds, of cunning that outmaneuvered kings, and of a vision so vast it reshaped continents. Genghis Khan didn't just conquer, he rewrote the rules of power itself. His rise was forged in betrayal, honed by adversity, and fueled by an understanding of human nature so precise it bordered on genius. From the moment he vowed to unite the fractured tribes of Mongolia to the day his empire sprawled from the Pacific to the Caspian Sea, every step was a masterclass in ambition. But what were the hidden forces behind this meteoric ascent? What did he know or do that others couldn't grasp? That's the mystery we're unraveling today. Behind every legend lies the truth, and the truth here is even more gripping than the myths. We're diving deep into the 20 secrets that catapulted Genghis Khan from the brink of death to the pinnacle of power. You'll discover how he turned enemies into loyal followers, how he exploited the weaknesses of mighty empires without firing a single arrow, and why his strategies still influence leaders centuries later. This is more than history, it's a blueprint of brilliance, a journey into the mind of a man who saw the world not as it was but as it could be, so saddle up. By the end of this, you won't just know how Genghis Khan rose, you'll understand the unstoppable force of a will that refused to bend. To understand the rise of Genghis Khan, you must first step into the frozen footsteps of a boy named Temujin, left to starve on the Mongolian steppe at just 9 years old. His father, a minor chieftain, had been poisoned by a rival tribe, and with his protector gone, Temujin's family was cast out like wolves in winter. The clan that once pledged loyalty stripped them of everything, their tents, their livestock, even their dignity. For years, they scavenged roots and rodents, dodging starvation while fending off raids from those who saw them as easy prey. It was here, in this crucible of desperation, that the first secret of his rise took shape. Hardship didn't break Temujin, it rewired him. Every scar taught a lesson. When his half-brother hoarded food, Temujin killed him without hesitation, a brutal act that cemented a lifelong rule: weakness invites betrayal. When horsemen from a rival tribe enslaved him, he endured the wooden collar around his neck, studying their tactics until he escaped. Survival wasn't just about strength, it was about seeing patterns others missed. While nobles feasted in their yurts, Temujin learned the steppe's unspoken laws. Alliances shift like the wind, loyalty is bought with action, and mercy is a luxury few can afford. Yet the most transformative lesson came from his mother, Holun. She didn't just teach him to endure, she showed him how to turn desperation into strategy. With no arrows, they fashioned weapons from bones. With no allies, they turned enemies against each other. This wasn't mere survival, it was the birth of a philosophy. Temujin realized power wasn't inherited, it was taken. And by the time he reached adulthood, the boy who'd gnawed on carcasses to survive had honed something far deadlier than a sword, a mind that saw chaos as a ladder. The steppe had tried to erase him. Instead, it gave the world its greatest conqueror. Even before he could swing a sword with mastery, Temujin understood something most warlords never grasp: real power flows through people, not just territory. His second secret wasn't written in battle plans but in an ancient Mongolian tradition, the anda, a bond stronger than family. Picture two boys cutting their hands, mixing blood with milk, and vowing to treat each other as brothers for life. That's how Temujin, still a scrappy teenager, clasped hands with Jamaka, the charismatic son of another clan. In that moment, neither realized this bond would shape empires or that it would shatter in a storm of rivalry. This was no childish pact. By choosing Jamaka, Temujin picked the perfect ally, someone with status, warriors, and a network of tribal connections he lacked. Jamaka's followers became his, their shared raids building Temujin's reputation. When bandits stole his family's horses, it was Jamaka who helped him track them down. When Temujin needed shelter during a blizzard, Jamaka's camp welcomed him. But here's the genius: every gift was a lesson. Temujin studied how Jamaka inspired loyalty, how he negotiated with elders, even how he dressed to impress potential allies. He wasn't just gaining a brother, he was auditing a masterclass in leadership. Yet the Anda bond reveals something deeper about Temujin's strategy. Unlike tribal khans who demanded obedience through fear, he sought mutual benefit. To an orphaned outcast, alliances weren't just tools, they were lifelines. Later, he'd apply this principle on a colossal scale, absorbing defeated enemies into his army if they pledged loyalty. But the twist: he always held the upper hand. When Jamaka's ambition clashed with his own, Temujin didn't hesitate to break the bond, proving his ultimate rule: alliances are sacred until they're obstacles. The boy who once needed a brother would become the man who outgrew everyone. This chapter of his life holds a razor-sharp lesson. Temujin's rise wasn't just about forging alliances, it was about mastering when to cherish them and when to crush them. Jamaka taught him diplomacy, but their eventual war taught him something crueler. In the game of power, even blood brothers can become stepping stones. Börte's kidnapping wasn't just a personal tragedy, it was the spark that lit Temujin's path to empire. Just months after their marriage, warriors from the Merkit tribe, longtime enemies of his family, swept into their camp at dawn. They came for revenge. Temujin's father had once stolen a Merkit bride, and now they repaid the insult by snatching Börte, dragging her into the night. Most men would have charged after them blindly, swords drawn. But Temujin did something far more revealing. He waited. For 9 months he plotted, forging alliances with powerful leaders like Ong Khan of the Kerates and his blood brother Jamaka. This wasn't hesitation, it was cold, calculated strategy. He knew rescuing Börte wasn't just about love, it was a test. Would clans follow an untested youth into battle? Could he turn a personal vendetta into a unifying crusade? The answer reshaped history. When Temujin finally led the attack, it wasn't as a lone avenger. It was at the head of a combined force, his first coalition. The Merkits, expecting a reckless raid, were crushed. Börte was recovered, but the real prize was the loyalty of those who fought beside him. Tribes took notice. Here was a leader who could rally factions that had feuded for generations. Yet the aftermath held an even darker lesson. Börte returned pregnant, and though Temujin accepted the child as his own, the event stripped away any illusions. Mercy had no place on the steppe. Years later, when he finally conquered the Merkits, his vengeance was absolute. Every man of fighting height was executed, their women and children absorbed into his growing nation. This episode reveals the third secret of his rise. Temujin transformed personal wounds into political leverage. Börte's kidnapping taught him that suffering, when weaponized, could bind men together more tightly than any oath. His patience proved he wasn't just a warrior, he was an architect of power, willing to bide his time until victory was certain. And when he struck, it wasn't just to reclaim a wife, it was to send a message. Cross him and your entire tribe would pay, but stand with him and you'd share in the spoils of a conqueror. From that moment forward, every enemy he crushed and every alliance he forged traced back to that cold night when he chose strategy over rage and began building an empire from the ashes of his pride. The steppe tribes had one unbreakable rule for centuries: blood determined power. If you were born into a noble family, you led. If not, you obeyed. But Temujin, now taking the name Genghis Khan, saw the fatal flaw in this system. What good was a general who inherited his title rather than earning it? Why waste talent just because a man's father wasn't a chieftain? His fourth secret wasn't just a strategy, it was a revolution. He tore up the old Mongol playbook and built something terrifyingly efficient. An army where skill trumped lineage, where a blacksmith's son could rise to command princes. Take Subutai, the legendary general who'd later crush empires from Russia to Hungary. He wasn't born with a golden spoon in his mouth, he was the son of a humble herdsman. Under traditional rules, he'd have spent his life tending sheep. But Genghis Khan spotted his genius during a hunting exercise. Where others saw a lowborn teenager, he saw a tactical prodigy. By promoting Subutai, he sent a shockwave through Mongol society. Suddenly, every warrior knew excellence would be rewarded, not suppressed. Loyalty and ability became the only currency that mattered. Even enemies who surrendered, like the defecting Naaman scribe Tatatunga, were given high office if they proved useful. This meritocracy gave Genghis Khan an unstoppable edge. While rival armies were led by spoiled aristocrats squabbling over prestige, his commanders were hungry, hand-picked specialists. Jelmi, another commoner turned general, perfected logistics, ensuring supplies moved like clockwork across thousands of miles. Jeeb, a former enemy who'd once shot Genghis Khan's horse in battle, was recruited on the spot for his audacity. The message was clear: past grudges didn't matter. What you could do tomorrow did, yet there was cunning beneath the idealism. By breaking the nobility's grip, Genghis Khan centralized power under himself. No rival clan could challenge him if their sons were sidelined by his protégés. Promotions weren't just rewards, they were traps. A gifted warrior lifted from poverty would owe everything to the Khan, creating unshakable loyalty. And those passed over, their resentment didn't threaten him, it weakened the old aristocracy further. The ripple effects changed warfare forever. Subutai's campaigns, like the audacious invasion of Europe, showcased what happened when brilliance, not birthright, led armies. While feudal kings wasted time managing jealous barons, Mongol generals acted with terrifying autonomy, adapting on the fly because they'd earned their rank. That's the real genius behind Genghis Khan's meritocracy. It wasn't just fair, it was ruthlessly pragmatic. He didn't destroy the old tribal system out of idealism. He burned it because winning mattered more than tradition. And in that fire, he forged the deadliest military machine the world had ever seen. On the windswept plains of Mongolia, where the spirits of ancestors whispered through the grass, power wasn't just won by the sword, it was granted by the heavens. Enter Teb Tengri, the mystic shaman whose vision would catapult Temujin from warlord to living legend. With his cloak of wolf skin and eyes rolled back in trance, Teb Tengri claimed to speak for the eternal blue sky itself, delivering a prophecy that would shake the steppe to its core. Temujin wasn't merely a man, but destiny's chosen, ordained to unite all tribes under one banner. This wasn't just theater. Spiritual authority was the fifth secret of Genghis Khan's rise, and he wielded it with chilling precision. While other chieftains relied on brute force, Temujin understood something deeper. Faith could bind men more tightly than fear. Teb Tengri's declaration gave him something no rival possessed: divine legitimacy. Suddenly, resisting Temujin wasn't just political defiance, it was blasphemy against the will of the gods. Tribes that might have hesitated to bow to a mortal conqueror found themselves kneeling before a celestial mandate. Yet behind the mysticism lay ruthless calculation. Temujin didn't just accept the shaman's blessing, he amplified it. When Teb Tengri staged rituals, Temujin ensured crowds witnessed his miracles, like the time the shaman summoned a sudden storm to prove heaven's favor. These spectacles weren't accidents, they were psychological warfare. Even Jamaka, his once blood brother turned rival, struggled to counter this supernatural narrative. How do you rally an army against a man the skies themselves seem to protect? But the true masterstroke came later. As Genghis Khan's power grew, so did Tengri's ambition, until the shaman began demanding tribute from the Khan's own family. That's when the divine mask slipped. In a move that laid bare the machinery of power, Genghis Khan had the overreaching shaman accidentally killed during a wrestling match. The message, even heaven's voice answered to the throne. Spiritual authority wasn't a leash, it was a tool to be used and discarded when its purpose was served. This episode reveals the duality at the heart of Genghis Khan's genius. He didn't just conquer bodies, he colonized imaginations. By merging the sacred and the political, he created a mandate no rival could replicate. Tribes didn't just fear his armies, they believed in his destiny. And that faith, carefully cultivated and brutally controlled, became the invisible scaffold holding up an empire. The steppe had seen many warriors, but only one man clever enough to turn the sky itself into his herald. Imagine a conqueror who understood that laws could bind an empire tighter than any army. That was Genghis Khan's sixth secret, the Yassa, a legal code so precise it governed everything from the theft of a single goat to the fate of nations. While other rulers relied on brute force alone, he wielded something far subtler, a system where justice was merciless but predictable, where a wandering merchant could cross 10,000 miles of Mongol territory without fear of bandits. This wasn't just order, it was psychological warfare in parchment form. The Yassa's brilliance lay in its duality. Steal a horse, your back would be broken without trial. But worship a foreign god, that was your right, even encouraged. Genghis Khan knew diversity couldn't be crushed, it had to be harnessed. Persian silk weavers, Chinese engineers, Nestorian Christian scribes all found protection under the Yassa so long as they obeyed its core tenets. The message was clear: defy the Khan's authority and death would come swiftly. Live peacefully within his system and you could keep your faith, your family, even your local customs. Take the case of smuggling. Under traditional steppe law, petty theft between tribes was endemic, a vicious cycle of raids and revenge. The Yassa broke this overnight by making punishment so severe it outweighed any gain. A Mongol caught stealing a single sheep would face execution. His family fined 9 times the animal's value. But here's the twist: those same laws explicitly shielded temples, monasteries, and scholars from taxation or conscription. A Muslim cleric in Bukhara or a Buddhist monk in Tibet had more legal protections under Mongol rule than they'd known under their own kings. This calculated balance turned rebellion into a losing proposition. Why risk uprising when the Khan's laws punished your enemies but left your way of life intact? The Yassa didn't just prevent chaos, it made submission rational. Merchants flocked to Mongol roads, knowing their caravans were safer there than in Christian Europe or Islamic Persia. Artisans captured in war willingly served because skill earned privilege under the code. Even spies found loopholes closed. The Yassa mandated that any traveler without official paperwork be detained, a primitive passport system stretching from Korea to Crimea. Yet beneath the tolerance lurked cold pragmatism, that religious freedom. It kept conquered peoples too divided to unite against him, the protection of trade routes. They became intelligence-gathering networks with merchants as unwitting informants. Genghis Khan's legal genius wasn't about fairness, it was about control. By making life under his rule more stable than resistance, he turned the vanquished into willing subjects. The Yassa proved an empire could be built on more than fear. It could run on the quiet, relentless machinery of calculated order. For centuries, the Silk Road had been a winding thread of gold and blood wealth flowing between empires, guarded by kings and bandits alike. Genghis Khan saw what others didn't. These caravans weren't just targets. They were the beating heart of power. His seventh secret began with ruthless ambushes, his horsemen descending like wolves on merchant trains, seizing silks, spices, and silver. But the real masterstroke came next. Instead of burning the trade routes, he hijacked them. Take the moment his forces captured the wealthy city of Bukhara. While most conquerors would have looted its bazaars and moved on, Genghis Khan did something unprecedented. He summoned the city's merchants not to execute them but to strike a deal. "You keep your lives," he told them, "and your goods. In return, you pay a tax 1/10 of your profits, and my army ensures no band it will ever touch your caravans again." It was protection racket on an imperial scale. Overnight, Mongol patrols became the guardians of the very routes they'd once plundered. The financial impact was staggering. With a network of secure roads stretching from China to Persia, trade boomed like never before. Taxes flowed into Mongol coffers, funding larger armies, better weapons, and more conquest. But the genius went deeper. Genghis Khan turned merchants into his eyes and ears. A Persian trader in Samarkand might casually mention a rebellious governor's plans, or a Chinese smuggler could reveal weak points in a distant city's walls. The Silk Road became an intelligence highway, its caravans carrying secrets alongside spices. Here's the twist: this wasn't just about money. By controlling trade, he strangled rivals without drawing a sword. When the Khwarezm Empire foolishly executed his envoys, Genghis Khan didn't just invade, he embargoed. Silk Road traffic detoured around Khwarezm, starving its cities of wealth until they crumbled from within. Meanwhile, Mongol-backed merchants undercut enemy economies, flooding markets with cheap goods to destabilize local artisans. The lesson was clear: Genghis Khan didn't conquer the Silk Road, he weaponized it. Every camel carried his influence, every bazaar became his outpost, and every gold coin minted in shadow of his empire bought another year of dominance. While kings fought over castles, he mastered something far more valuable: the invisible web that connected them all. Genghis Khan didn't just conquer cities, he weaponized fear itself. His eighth secret was psychological warfare, so precise it could collapse empires before his armies even arrived. Picture this: a messenger gallops to the gates of a defiant town, holding not a threat but a promise. "Surrender now," he says, "and your people will live, your temples will stand, your merchants will keep their gold. But resist." Here, the messenger pauses, letting the silence fill with what everyone already knew: the stories of Nishapur, where the Mongols slaughtered every living thing down to the cats and dogs, or Samarkand, where pyramids of skulls stretched taller than a man. The choice was simple: kneel and survive, or fight and become a warning to the next city. This wasn't random brutality, it was a calculated system. By obliterating one resistant city and sparing another that submitted, Genghis Khan turned rumor into his deadliest ally. News traveled faster than his cavalry. A merchant fleeing a massacre would spread tales of Mongol horrors, while a trader from a spared city would boast of their wise governor's decision. The result: panic became his advance guard. When the Khwarezm Empire dared execute his envoys, Genghis Khan didn't just punish one king, he made an example of every city that followed orders. Urgench burned so thoroughly that the river was said to run black with ink from drowned libraries, while nearby towns that opened their gates found Mongol soldiers paying for supplies in silver. Yet the real genius lay in the exceptions. Occasionally, he'd spare a single survivor, a child, a craftsman, to escape and recount the horror. These weren't acts of mercy, they were amplifiers of terror. And when a city did surrender, he'd often exaggerate their compliance, praising their wisdom loudly enough for neighboring rulers to hear. The contrast was deliberate: defy him and your name would be erased. Submit and you might even profit, but the darkest twist: his cruelty was selective. The same man who ordered mass executions also banned the torture of prisoners, not out of kindness but because fear worked better when it was predictable. A surrendered soldier knew he'd be conscripted, not mutilated. A spy knew death would be quick. This consistency made his threats credible. When Genghis Khan said, "Surrender or die," no one doubted he meant it. And that certainty, more than the swords themselves, is what made resistance feel futile. In the end, his greatest weapon wasn't the bow or the horse. It was the human mind, conditioned to believe that against this conqueror, defiance wasn't bravery, it was suicide. Before the first arrow flew in battle, Genghis Khan already knew his enemies' weaknesses where their grain stores lay, which generals nursed grudges. Even the hidden mountain passes their scouts thought secret. This was no magic trick, but the ninth secret of his dominance, a spy network woven into the fabric of everyday life, stretching further than any army could march. Merchants became his eyes, relaying gossip from caravanserais. Deserting soldiers were allowed to escape, carrying false tales to enemy camps. Even wandering holy men, trusted for their piety, might slip details about fortress layouts into their prayers. But the real stroke of genius, the YAM system, a network of horseback relay stations so vast and efficient, messages could cross 600 miles in a single day, faster than any medieval kingdom could fathom. Picture this: a rider gallops into a YAM station, sweat-soaked and breathless, thrusting a lacquered box into fresh hands before his horse even stops. Within seconds, another horseman tears toward the horizon, the message inside racing onward while the first rider collapses by a fire. These stations dotted every major route, 9,000 by the empire's peak, each stocked with spare horses, fodder, and guards sworn to protect the couriers. The system was so precise that Marco Polo marveled at its speed centuries later, noting how even fruit deliveries for the Khan arrived still chilled with morning dew. But these weren't just carrying melons and love letters. Every scrap of intelligence, rebel movements, harvest failures, disloyal governors flowed along these routes straight to Genghis Khan's tent. The true brilliance lay in its duality. While the YAM moved information with terrifying speed, it also created the illusion of omnipresence. A governor in Persia might execute a tax collector on Monday, only to find the Khan's retribution at his gates by Friday, as if the wind itself had whispered his crime across continents. Rumors spread that the Mongols could see through mountains, reinforcing the terror that kept provinces obedient. Yet the system's greatest power was subtlety. When conquering China, Genghis Khan used YAM riders to spread exaggerated tales of his army's size, causing garrisons to flee before a single skirmish. Other times, he let intercepted messages escape, false orders detailing non-existent troop movements that lured enemies into traps. But the YAM was more than a weapon, it bound the empire together. A merchant in Crimea could send word to the Khan's court in Karakoram and receive guarantees of safe passage within weeks. Officials inspecting taxation records in one province could cross-reference them with accounts from another, making corruption riskier. Even ordinary travelers could use the stations, provided they carried the golden tablets known as paisa, an early passport system that turned the empire's roads into veins of control. What Genghis Khan understood was this: knowledge wasn't just power, it was time. While rival rulers waited months to learn of invasions or revolts, he reacted in days, turning instability into opportunity. His spies and couriers didn't just serve the empire, they made it feel infinite, as if the Khan's gaze could pierce any wall. And in that certainty, that resistance was futile because he already knew your plans, lay the quiet terror that held kingdoms in thrall without drawing a single blade. For centuries, the steppe warriors had one glaring weakness: walls. The Mongol horsemen could outride any army, outshoot any foe, but faced with towering city fortifications, they faltered. That changed when Genghis Khan encountered his first Chinese engineers. These weren't just prisoners of war, they were keys to unlocking an entire continent. The 10th secret of his rise wasn't stolen gold or land, but knowledge, the art of siegecraft, wrenched from the hands of conquered civilizations and turned against them. Picture the scene after the fall of Zhongdu, modern-day Beijing. As smoke curled over the shattered gates, Mongol scouts rounded up surviving craftsmen, not for execution but interrogation. Among them was Genghis Khan, a master engineer who designed the city's own defenses. Instead of chains, Genghis Khan offered him a choice: die forgotten or live as the architect of empires. Genghis Khan chose survival, and in doing so handed the Mongols something far deadlier than swords: the ability to crack open cities like walnuts. Under his guidance, the nomads who'd once trembled before stone walls now built trebuchets that could fling 400-pound stones with terrifying precision. They learned to divert rivers to flood moats, tunnel beneath fortifications, and even construct mobile siege towers from dismantled ships' timbers. But the real innovation wasn't just in machinery, it was in mindset. Traditional steppe warfare valued speed and fluidity. Sieges demanded patience. Genghis Khan adapted ruthlessly. When attacking the impenetrable Jin stronghold of Kaifeng, his forces surrounded the city not for weeks but months. They built earthworks higher than the walls, starving the defenders while their engineers perfected a new horror: gunpowder bombs lobbed from catapults, their explosions turning night into day. The psychological impact was as devastating as the physical. Imagine being a garrison soldier, watching nomads outbuild your civilization's finest architects. This technological theft had a cruel irony. The very experts who designed defenses for Chinese emperors now dismantled them for the Khan. Muslim engineers captured in Persia added their own innovations, like counterweight trebuchets that could reduce towers to rubble in hours. Each conquered city became a university of destruction, its brightest minds pressed into Mongol service. By the time Genghis Khan turned westward, his siege masters could replicate any defense they encountered, then improve upon it. Yet the lesson here runs deeper than engineering. Genghis Khan grasped something few conquerors had: that true power lies not in rejecting what you don't understand, but confiscating it. Walls had once been the dividing line between civilization and barbarian. Now they were merely obstacles awaiting demolition. The man who'd been born in a felt tent died knowing his armies could topple any fortress on earth because he'd turned his greatest weakness into yet another weapon. And that shift from fearing walls to mastering them reshaped the boundaries of the possible, proving once again that for Genghis Khan, every barrier existed only to be broken. The most dangerous trick Genghis Khan ever taught his enemies was how to think they'd won. Picture this: a Mongol cavalry unit charges at an enemy formation, arrows flying, then suddenly wheels away in apparent panic, dropping weapons as they flee. The opposing general, sensing victory, gives the order to pursue. His troops surge forward, chasing the broken Mongols across open ground, only to find themselves encircled by horsemen materializing from behind distant hills. That's the 11th secret of Genghis Khan's dominance: the fake retreat, a tactic so devastating it turned overconfidence into a death sentence. This wasn't just running away. Every feigned collapse followed precise choreography. Riders would loosen their armor to make the rout seem genuine, letting captured banners drag in the dirt. Some would even stage arguments mid-retreat, screaming insults at their cowardly comrades. The goal: trigger the enemy's primal urge to chase a wounded foe. European knights at the Battle of Mohi fell for it, breaking formation to pursue what they thought was a broken enemy, only to ride straight into a killing zone where Mongol archers had dismounted beside pre-dug trenches. The Hungarians found themselves trapped between volleys of arrows and sudden cavalry charges from directions they never anticipated. What made this tactic so lethal was its psychological dimension. Genghis Khan understood that victory creates blindness. When an army sees its opponents fleeing, discipline often crumbles in the rush for glory. The Mongols exploited this human weakness relentlessly. During the invasion of Khwarezm, they pretended to abandon their entire camp near the city of Gurganj, tents standing, cooking fires still burning. The defenders poured out to loot the supplies, only to find themselves caught between hidden archers and returning cavalry who'd circled undetected under cover of night. Yet the real brilliance lay in the details. These retreats weren't random scrambles, they followed carefully scouted paths, leading pursuers into terrain that neutralized their strength. Heavy European knights chasing light Mongol riders would find their horses exhausted in marshland. Chinese infantry formations pursuing too far would emerge from defensive positions into open plains where mounted archers could pick them apart. Even the timing was calculated. Fake retreats often occurred near dusk when shadows helped conceal ambush positions and exhausted enemies couldn't regroup effectively. Perhaps the most chilling example occurred during Subutai's European campaign. After weeks of harassing Hungarian forces, the Mongols staged a full-scale retreat across the Sojo River. King Bela's army chased them for days, strung out along muddy roads until the Mongols suddenly turned at the Mohai Plains. Bridge demolitions trapped the Hungarians as fresh Mongol divisions appeared from forests thought to be impassable. The river ran red with the blood of an army that had, moments earlier, believed itself triumphant. This tactic reveals a fundamental truth about Genghis Khan's warfare. He didn't just defeat armies, he manipulated their instincts. The fake retreat wasn't merely a military maneuver, it was a psychological trap baited with human nature itself. Against opponents who measured victory in ground held or enemies slain, the Mongols redefined what victory meant, luring you into losing on your own terms, in places you never saw coming, for reasons you only understood when it was far too late. Most conquerors saw weather as an obstacle. Genghis Khan saw it as artillery. The 12th secret of his dominance wasn't just mastering terrain, it was weaponizing the elements themselves. Take the infamous Battle of the Khalkha River in 1223, where Mongol forces faced a combined army of Russian princes and Cuman warriors. The Russians, clad in heavy chainmail, assumed their numerical advantage guaranteed victory. What they didn't account for was the Khan's merciless understanding of nature's brutal arithmetic. As winter winds howled across the steppe, the Mongols staged a feigned retreat, luring their pursuers for days across frozen ground. Exhausted and strung out, the Russian heavy cavalry reached the Khalkha River just as temperatures plummeted. That's when the trap snapped shut. Mongol archers, conditioned to shoot accurately even with numb fingers, unleashed volleys from all sides while the Europeans struggled to knock arrows with stiffened hands. Ice turned the riverbanks into deadly slides where armored knights floundered like beached fish. The Mongols, wearing layered fox fur coats lined with silk, a fabric that prevented deep arrow wounds by wrapping around arrowheads, moved with lethal precision while their enemies succumbed to frostbite and disarray. But the real masterstroke came weeks earlier. Mongol scouts had studied local wind patterns, timing their campaign so prevailing gusts would blow snow and dust directly into enemy faces during crucial engagements. They'd even identified shallow fords invisible to the Russians, allowing flanking maneuvers where none were thought possible. By the battle's end, 9 out of 10 Russian nobles lay dead, some crushed beneath makeshift bridges the Mongols sabotaged mid-crossing. Weather manipulation became a hallmark of Genghis Khan's conquests. In the Khwarezm campaign, his forces waited until the fierce Persian summer had drained reservoirs before besieging cities, knowing thirst would break garrisons faster than swords. During the invasion of the Jin dynasty, they attacked across frozen rivers that served as natural highways, bypassing fortified mountain passes entirely. Even something as simple as timing raids at dawn when desert winds kicked up blinding dust gave his archers cover to approach undetected. What separated Genghis Khan from other warlords was this: where they saw environmental hardship, he saw asymmetry. While European knights dismissed the steppe's winters as mere suffering, his armies trained in them until cold became an ally. While Persian generals cursed the desert heat, the Mongols rationed fermented mare's milk, a drink that hydrated better than water and moved at night. Every climate extreme became a force multiplier, every storm a smokescreen. The lesson was etched in the ice at Khalkha. Against a commander who turned nature itself into a weapon, no amount of armor or numbers could save you. Most conquerors saw defeated armies as corpses waiting to be counted. Genghis Khan saw them as raw material. His 13th secret wasn't just victory on the battlefield. It was the alchemy that turned yesterday's enemies into tomorrow's shock troops. Consider the fate of the Karaite tribe after their defeat. Their leader Togrul had been Temujin's early ally, even granting him the title Khan, until ambition turned them against each other. When the Karaite fell, any other warlord would have executed their warriors as traitors. Instead, Genghis Khan did the unthinkable. He offered them a place in his ranks, absorbing the entire Karaite cavalry under his banners. This wasn't mercy, it was cold arithmetic. Every spared soldier meant fewer battles needed to be fought later. The Karaite horsemen, steeped in steppe warfare, required no training. Their knowledge of local terrain became his. Their grudges against rival tribes fueled his campaigns. Even their loyalty was secured through a brutal logic. Having betrayed their own kin for the Khan, they had nowhere else to go. Defectors knew rejoining old allies would earn them only scorn, while serving Genghis Khan offered plunder, prestige, and survival. The brilliance of this policy exploded during the invasion of Khwarezm. Persian chroniclers gasp at how entire garrisons, Turkic mercenaries who'd moments before fought for the Shah, switched sides mid-siege, turning their catapults against their former comrades. These weren't just soldiers changing masters, they were bringing insider intelligence. A defecting engineer would reveal where the city walls had weak foundations. A disgruntled officer could pinpoint which noble families might surrender without a fight. Each absorbed unit became a living map of their homeland, guiding the Mongols to vulnerabilities no scout could uncover. Yet the system had razor-sharp safeguards. New recruits were always dispersed among loyal Mongol units, preventing rebellion. Promotion was possible. The legendary General Jeeb began as an enemy who'd shot Genghis Khan's horse, but required proven valor. Most crucially, the policy only applied before final resistance. A city that surrendered, its warriors lived. One that forced a costly siege, the streets would run red as an example. This calculated balance made submission rational. Why die for a losing side when the Khan offered a share of the spoils? The ripple effects changed warfare forever. While feudal lords wasted men executing skilled prisoners, Genghis Khan's army swelled with each victory, its diversity becoming a weapon. Turkic horse archers, Chinese siege engineers, Persian tacticians, all found themselves part of a machine that rewarded competence over birth. By the time his descendants reached Europe, their ranks contained warriors from dozens of conquered nations, a kaleidoscope of brutality where every defeat made the Mongols stronger. The lesson was etched in blood. True power doesn't destroy enemies, it conscripts them. Where other warlords commanded chaotic hordes, Genghis Khan built something far deadlier, an army that moved like a single organism across continents. The 14th secret behind his dominance was the decimal system, a military structure so brutally efficient it turned 10,000 warriors into extensions of a single will. At its heart lay a simple, revolutionary idea. Every unit was divisible by 10, from the smallest squad to the largest division, creating a chain of command so precise that orders could ripple across thousands of miles without distortion. Picture a Mongol tumen, 10,000 horsemen, not as a mob but as a machine with interlocking parts. Within it, each thousand was led by a trusted Noyan, reporting directly to the Khan. Each thousand split into 10 hundreds, every 100 into 10 tens. Even the basic 10-man unit, called an arban, had a leader responsible for knowing each soldier's name, skills, and even the temperament of his horse. This wasn't just organization, it was neural wiring on a battlefield scale. When a general commanded a tumen to feign retreat, every arban leader knew his exact role in the maneuver, from which hills to use as cover to when to pivot for the counterattack. The system's genius went beyond hierarchy. Because every unit was modular, armies could split and recombine like mercury. 1,000 cavalry dispatched to chase down fleeing enemies could reconstitute from scattered arbans within minutes. Wounded units merged seamlessly with fresh ones mid-battle, maintaining combat strength. During the invasion of Khwarezm, this flexibility allowed Mongol forces to appear simultaneously at cities hundreds of miles apart, not through magic, but because each Tumen operated autonomously while adhering to the Khan's overarching strategy. Communication thrived on this structure. Orders passed down the decimal chain with eerie speed. A tactic devised by Genghis Khan at dawn could reach the farthest Arban by noon, executed with near-identical precision across an 80-mile front. Contrast this with European feudal levies, where barons argued over precedence while Mongol arrows darkened the sky. The decimal system erased ambiguity. When a commander signaled with colored flags or whistling arrows, every soldier knew precisely which tier of the hierarchy was being summoned or redirected. Yet the true innovation was psychological. In an Arban, each man was bound to his 9 comrades by oath. If one fled in battle, the other 9 would face execution. This created peer pressure fiercer than any overseer's whip. Conversely, exceptional units earned promotions not individually, but as a group, tying fates together. 100 that distinguished itself might be elevated to 1,000's core, their former comrades now reporting to them. The message was clear: loyalty and competence lifted entire circles, not just lone warriors. By the time Genghis Khan's descendants reached Eastern Europe, this structure had become a nightmare for slower, feudal armies. A Hungarian knight might boast of personal valor, but against a force where every soldier was a cog in a self-correcting machine, individual bravery meant nothing. The decimal system didn't just organize men. It dissolved the line between command and execution, turning the chaos of war into something almost mathematical. And in that relentless efficiency, spanning from a single Arban to 100,000 strong, lay the cold precision that made the Mongol war machine not just an army, but a force of nature. The true terror of Genghis Khan's armies wasn't just their numbers. It was the unholy symphony of man, horse, and bow that made each warrior a mobile killing platform. While European knights lumbered into battle weighed down by armor, Mongol riders became death incarnate at full gallop, loosing arrows with terrifying precision while maneuvering at speeds no infantry could match. The 15th secret of their dominance lay in the perfect marriage of 2 ancient technologies: the composite recurve bow and the hardy steppe pony. Together, they created a warfare revolution that conquered continents. Start with the bow itself, a masterpiece of layered sinew, horn, and wood that could drive an arrow through armor at 300 yards. Unlike European longbows requiring brute strength to draw, the Mongol version stored energy like a coiled spring, letting riders fire rapidly from any angle. Each archer carried 2 quivers containing 60 arrows apiece, their tips ranging from armor-piercing bodkins to whistling signal variants, but the real innovation was in how they used them. Mongol boys learned to shoot while hanging sideways from their saddles, releasing arrows at the exact moment all 4 hooves left the ground, the only moment a galloping horse is truly still. This allowed accurate fire at full speed, turning every retreat into a lethal trap. Then there were the horses, small, shaggy, and impossibly tough. While European warhorses required grain and careful stabling, Mongol ponies thrived on steppe grass alone, able to cover 60 miles a day for weeks without exhaustion. Each rider maintained a string of remounts, rotating them to prevent fatigue. This mobility meant Mongol units could appear where least expected, strike, and vanish before heavy cavalry could respond. During the invasion of Hungary, scouts reported Mongol forces hundreds of miles apart on the same day, not through magic, but because their mounts outpaced rumor itself. The tactical implications were devastating. Traditional armies relied on static formations, shield walls, pike squares, that Mongol archers simply refused to engage directly. Instead, they'd encircle enemies at range, raining arrows from all directions while staying just beyond retaliation distance. If adversaries charged, the Mongols would feign retreat, their horses easily outdistancing pursuers while riders twisted backward to fire with deadly accuracy. This Parthian shot technique, perfected over generations, turned every chase into a slaughterhouse. At the Battle of Mohi, this system reached its apex. Hungarian knights, confident in their heavy armor, formed up expecting a traditional clash. Instead, Mongol horse archers swept past their flanks in swirling formations, arrows finding weak points at joints and visors. When the knights tried to pursue, their exhausted war horses collapsed while fresh Mongol ponies kept circling. By dusk, the Danube ran red with the blood of Europe's finest, felled by warriors who'd spent lifetimes merging bow, blade, and bridle into a single instrument of annihilation. The lesson echoed far beyond battlefields. Genghis Khan grasped what others didn't, that true military revolutions aren't about bigger weapons, but redefining the very rules of engagement. Against an enemy who refused to stand still, who could kill from 3 football fields away while moving at 30 miles per hour, medieval warfare itself became obsolete. The horse and bow weren't just tools, they were the great equalizers, letting a nomadic people humble empires while rewriting the mathematics of power itself. Genghis Khan didn't just build an empire, he engineered a dynasty, turning his sons into living extensions of his will. While other conquerors saw family as heirs to a throne, he saw them as command modules, each strategically placed to amplify his reach. Jochai, his eldest, was given the wild western steppes, a frontier of rebellion and opportunity. Chagatai, the fiercest, became the enforcer, policing the empire's heartland with ruthless efficiency. Urgedei, the diplomat, smoothed fractures between factions, while Tolui, the youngest, inherited the elite imperial guard and the sacred homeland. This wasn't just nepotism, it was a calculated system where loyalty and bloodline became the empire's operating system. Take Jochai's appointment. Born from Börte's disputed pregnancy after her Merkid captivity, some whispered he wasn't truly Genghis Khan's son. Instead of disowning him, the Khan weaponized that doubt. By granting Jochai the turbulent western territories, he gave him a chance to prove his worth through conquest while also exiling potential discord from the empire's core. The message was clear: loyalty would be rewarded even for those with questionable origins, yet there were limits. When Jochai later hesitated during the Khwarezm campaign, his brother Chagatai publicly denounced him as a coward. Genghis Khan didn't intervene, he let the tension fuel their rivalry, knowing competition between his sons would drive them to outperform one another. Chagatai's role as the empire's disciplinarian revealed another layer of the design. While Urgedei charmed vassals with feasts and diplomacy, Chagatai enforced the Yassa legal code with fanatical precision. His presence ensured that even in regions thousands of miles from Karakoram, the Khan's laws felt immediate and inescapable. This duality, Urgedei's honey and Chagatai's whip, kept the empire balanced between attraction and intimidation. But the masterstroke came with Tolui. By entrusting him with the homeland and the elite guard, Genghis Khan ensured continuity. While his brothers expanded outward, Tolui safeguarded the source of Mongol identity: the sacred mountains, the ancestral pastures, and the veteran warriors who remembered the old ways. This division of labor transformed the family into a self-replicating mechanism of control. When Genghis Khan finally died, the empire didn't fracture. It accelerated because each son had spent decades mastering his slice of the machine. The brilliance of this system lay in its flexibility. Unlike European monarchies obsessed with primogeniture, where the eldest son inherited everything and siblings became threats, the Mongol model gave each prince a stake in the empire's survival. They weren't waiting for their father's death, they were too busy managing their own domains. And when Urgedei succeeded as Great Khan, his brothers didn't revolt, they reported to him because their power derived from the same source. Genghis Khan hadn't just raised sons, he'd built a fractal hierarchy where every level mirrored the whole. Loyalty wasn't optional, it was structural, woven into the empire's very architecture. Yet there was a dark corollary to this design. By making his family the empire's backbone, Genghis Khan ensured that any threat to one was a threat to all. When Jochai's descendants later resisted central authority, Tolui's lineage crushed them without hesitation. The dynasty could tolerate internal rivalry, but never disloyalty. In the end, the Khan's greatest legacy wasn't just the territory he conquered, but the bloodline he programmed to defend it. Centuries after his death, his descendants, from the Yuan emperors of China to the Ilkhans of Persia, would still be playing the roles he'd assigned them, proving that the truest conquests aren't of land but of generations. What do you do when two enemies are too strong to fight at once? Simple, you let them bleed each other dry first. Genghis Khan's 17th secret was a masterclass in strategic patience, the enemy division strategy, where he manipulated existing rivalries until his targets were too weak to resist. Nowhere was this more devastating than in his handling of China's fractured dynasties. The Jin Empire in the north and the Song dynasty in the south had been locked in a bitter stalemate for generations, their border wars draining both sides. Instead of charging in as yet another invader, the Khan played the long game, arming the Song with Mongol horses and tactics to weaken the Jin, while secretly promising the Jin nobles he'd help them crush the Song. The plan unfolded like a lethal dance. For years, Mongol envoys shuttled between the two courts, offering the Song military advisors to modernize their armies against the Jin, while assuring the Jin that their real enemy was the decadent Song. Meanwhile, Genghis Khan's spies stoked every existing grievance, reminding the Jin how the Song had once allied with their Jurchen ancestors to betray the Khitans, while whispering to the Song that the Jin planned to invade once the Mongols were gone. By the time the Mongols turned on the Jin, their once mighty cavalry had been ground down by endless Song border clashes, and when the Khan finally marched south against the Song, their best troops had already been sacrificed in proxy battles. The brilliance lay in the details. Mongol gifts of horses to the Song were deliberately mixed. Some prized stallions to strengthen their cavalry, but others infected with equine diseases that ravaged local herds. Defecting Jin officers shared tactical insights with the Song that were just flawed enough to lure them into traps. Even the timing of attacks was calculated to exploit seasonal tensions striking the Jin during their annual grain shipments to the Song, ensuring each dynasty blamed the other for shortages. This wasn't just divide and conquer, it was geopolitical alchemy, turning hostility into a self-sustaining weapon. While European kings wasted men besieging castles, Genghis Khan made his enemies tear down their own walls. The lesson echoed far beyond China. In Persia, he let rival city-states believe the Mongols favored one over another until their mutual betrayals left them defenseless. In Russia, princely feuds manipulated by Mongol spies made unified resistance impossible. The chilling truth, many of these doomed rulers died still cursing their traditional enemies, never realizing the hand that had truly orchestrated their ruin. Genghis Khan understood something fundamental about power. The deadliest conflicts aren't always the ones you start, they're the ones you inherit, amplify, and then harvest like ripe wheat. And in that understanding, he turned the greatest weakness of fractured lands, their divisions, into the very reason they fell. Most conquerors saw merchants as walking treasure chests. Genghis Khan saw them as the nervous system of his empire. The 18th secret of his dominance wasn't just tolerating trade. It was actively engineering the largest free trade zone the world had ever seen. Take Jamal al-Din, a Persian silk merchant who should have been just another casualty of war when Mongol forces sacked his hometown. Instead, he found himself summoned to the Khan's tent, not in chains, but with an offer, protection, tax exemptions, and armed escorts across thousands of miles of safe roads, if he'd keep doing exactly what he'd always done, just on an imperial scale. This wasn't charity, it was cold-eyed strategy. Jamal's caravans became mobile intelligence networks, their routes studded with yam way stations doubling as spy hubs. A rumor overheard in a Samarkand caravanserai about rebel movements could reach Karakoram faster than a galloping horse. The spices and silks they carried weren't just luxuries, they were currency to bribe border guards, maps disguised as trade ledgers, and even smuggled siege engineers hidden among camel drivers. But the real genius lay in the incentives. While medieval European kings routinely bankrupted merchants with arbitrary taxes, Genghis Khan's seal, the golden paisa, guaranteed fixed, predictable tariffs. A trader might pay 1/10 of his profits, but he could calculate it in advance from Crimea to Beijing with no surprise tolls or bandits. The certainty itself became a lure. The economic impact was staggering. Under the Pax Mongolica, a lone merchant could traverse 6,000 miles from Constantinople to Hangzhou without changing currency or fearing piracy. Mongol patrols ruthlessly exterminated bandits along the Silk Road, their heads displayed on pikes as marketing. Specialized craftsmen captured in Conquest, like weavers from Herat or porcelain makers from Jingdezhen, were relocated along trade routes like human infrastructure projects. Even the infamous sack of Baghdad had a commercial dimension. Its destruction rerouted Persian Gulf trade northward through Mongol-controlled overland routes, starving rival powers of revenue. Yet the system's true brilliance was its self-perpetuating nature. The safer trade became, the more merchants flocked to Mongol territory. The more merchants prospered, the heavier the tax coffers swelled. The wealthier the empire grew, the stronger its armies became to protect the next wave of caravans. It was a feedback loop of power where commerce didn't just fund conquest, it made further conquest inevitable. By the time Marco Polo's family embarked on their journeys, the Mongols weren't just facilitating trade, they'd turned it into a geopolitical weapon, one camel load of silk at a time. The lesson echoed beyond economics. While feudal lords hoarded gold in vaults, Genghis Khan understood real wealth was movement, the flow of goods, information, and talent across borders he controlled. Jamal al-Din died a rich man, his descendants still leading caravans generations later. The cities that resisted the Mongols, their markets stood empty, their artisans scattered, their currencies worthless. In the end, the great Khan proved something radical. Sometimes the surest way to dominate isn't by taking, but by letting others bring everything to you. Even in death, Genghis Khan wielded power through absence. His 19th secret wasn't just how he lived, but how he vanished. When the conqueror drew his final breath in 1227, his closest generals didn't announce his passing. They carried out a ritual so meticulous it turned his mortality into another weapon. According to legend, the funeral procession killed every living thing they encountered: birds, livestock, even travelers, to erase all witnesses to the burial site. The slaves who dug the grave were executed by the soldiers who guarded them, who were then slaughtered by their own commanders, creating a chain of silence stretching across the steppe. By the time the earth closed over the Khan's body, no intact human memory knew its location. This wasn't mere superstition, it was strategic genius. Across history, conquerors from Alexander to Napoleon saw their tombs become political battlegrounds after death, their bones desecrated by rivals or worshipped by rebels. Genghis Khan avoided both fates by making his grave invisible. Without a shrine, no faction could claim his spiritual mantle. Without relics, no enemy could symbolically destroy him. Even the Mongol elite only honored him at a symbolic altar in the homeland, leaving the true burial site to become one with the wilderness he'd mastered in life. The psychological impact was profound. In the decades that followed, rumors placed his tomb everywhere, beneath a diverted river in Mongolia, hidden in the Altai Mountains, even submerged in Lake Baikal's depths. Each theory only amplified his mythos. Nomadic tradition held that disturbing the resting place of a great Khan would unleash cataclysm, so the mere possibility of an unknown grave acted as a deterrent. When tomb hunters did search, the landscape itself seemed to resist. Local legends spoke of sudden sandstorms burying expeditions alive, or arrows materializing from thin air to strike the greedy. Modern technology has fared no better. Satellite scans, ground-penetrating radar, and international archaeological teams have all failed to locate the tomb. The closest discovery, a potential ritual site near the sacred Börte mountain, lacks definitive proof. Just like every other lead, this enduring mystery serves as the final masterstroke of Genghis Khan's rule. By refusing to let death fix him in place, he remained eternal, not a relic of the past, but a presence forever hovering just beyond reach, as limitless in legend as he'd been in life. The man who conquered 2/3 of the known world ultimately proved that the greatest power isn't just controlling territory, it's controlling imagination itself. On his deathbed, as the conqueror's breath grew shallow in the summer of 1227, Genghis Khan dictated not just his will, but a blueprint for eternity, a succession plan so meticulously crafted it defied the fate of every empire before him. While Alexander's domain fractured among squabbling generals and Rome's borders crumbled under weak heirs, the dying Khan orchestrated a transfer of power that would keep his empire surging forward like a steppe hurricane. At the heart of this final masterstroke stood Urgide, his third son, not the fiercest warrior nor the shrewdest politician, but the one man who could balance the tempers of his brothers and the ambitions of the Mongol elite. The choice was anything but sentimental. Urgide's greatest strength lay in what he wasn't. He lacked Chagatai's brutal inflexibility, Jochai's disputed lineage, and Tolui's dangerous popularity with the imperial guard. Genghis Khan recognized that consolidating conquests required a different skill set than winning them. Where he himself had ruled through terror and brilliance, Urgide would govern through wine-fueled diplomacy and bureaucratic patience. The old Khan even staged a macabre rehearsal years earlier, feigning illness to observe how his sons and generals reacted, testing alliances, exposing hidden rivalries, and confirming Urgide's unique ability to mediate between factions. But true to form, Genghis Khan didn't rely on trust alone. His deathbed arrangements created interlocking checks and balances worthy of a chess grandmaster. Tolui, as keeper of the homeland and the elite guard, became regent until Urgide's formal election, a delay that prevented power vacuums. Chagatai was given oversight of the legal code, binding him to the system rather than against it. Most crucially, the Kurultai, the assembly of Mongol nobles, was institutionalized as the sole body that could confirm each new Khan, turning succession from a free-for-all into a ritualized process. This wasn't just passing a crown, it was engineering consent among the very men who might have torn the empire apart. The system proved its worth almost immediately. When Urgide finally assumed full power in 1229, he didn't waste energy crushing revolts or purging rivals. His authority had been pre-legitimized. Instead, he launched the empire's most ambitious expansion yet, directing his brothers like pieces on a global board. Chagatai secured Central Asia, Tolui's lineage pushed into Persia, and Jochai's descendants began the conquest of Russia. This wasn't a family torn by succession, it was a machine with each cog turning in synchronized motion. Even Urgide's infamous drunkenness became a political tool, as his raucous feasts doubled as forums where grudges were dissolved in fermented mare's milk rather than blood. Yet the true testament to Genghis Khan's foresight came decades after his death. When Urgide died unexpectedly in 1241, the system held. The Kurultai convened without chaos, electing his son Guyuk despite fierce rivalries. Later, when Tolui's son Mernk seized power, he did so through procedural maneuvering rather than civil war. Compare this to the bloody aftermaths following rulers like Attila or Charlemagne, and the difference is stark. The Mongol Empire didn't just survive its founder, it thrived for generations because Genghis Khan understood something fundamental. Conquest is meaningless without structures that outlive the conqueror. His final lesson echoes through history. Great men often build with stone and steel, but the sharpest minds build with systems and precedents. By turning succession into a repeatable process rather than a personal inheritance, Genghis Khan achieved what no warlord before him could, an empire that didn't just rise spectacularly, but endured methodically, proving that even death could be outmaneuvered with enough foresight. From the frozen steppes where a starving child named Temujin learned to turn suffering into strategy, to the sprawling empire where merchants moved like veins carrying gold and secrets, Genghis Khan's rise wasn't built on any single secret, but a web of 20 interlocking brilliance. Think of it like the composite layers of his legendary bow. Remove even one strip of sinew, and the entire weapon loses its lethal snap. His survival instincts, forged in exile, taught him when to strike and when to wait. The spiritual theater of shamans like Teb Tengri cloaked raw ambition in celestial mandate. The decimal system turned chaos into precision, while the fake retreat turned overconfidence into graves. Every absorbed enemy soldier expanded his strength, every controlled trade route funded his campaigns, and every vanished tomb sealed his myth forever. But here's what's truly fascinating: none of these tactics existed in isolation. The Yassa legal code kept conquered cities obedient, which made the Silk Road safe, which filled Mongol coffers, which paid for the siege engines designed by defecting engineers. The meritocracy bred loyalty among low-born generals, who led tumens to victories that fed the terror propaganda, which made the next city surrender without a fight. It was a self-perpetuating machine where each secret amplified the others, turning momentum into inevitability. So which piece was most pivotal? Was it the trauma of Börte's kidnapping that taught him to weaponize personal wounds into political unity? Or the spy networks that let him outthink enemies before battles even began? Maybe it was the succession plan that turned his sons into a dynasty rather than a blood feud. That's the debate we're leaving to you. Drop your pick in the comments, whether it's the horse archer blitzkriegs or the psychological warfare that collapsed empires with whispers. And if you think Genghis Khan's legacy ended with the Middle Ages, think again. His DNA might be coursing through millions alive today, from the shadows of European royalty to the steppes of Kazakhstan. The hidden descendants of history's greatest conqueror are a story all their own. One will unravel soon. Until then, remember, true power isn't just about scale. It's about systems where every thread pulls tight to form a noose or a throne.